My name is Omar Khalil, and this is the story of how helping people escape death led me straight into its jaws, and how I barely made it out alive. Before we begin, I need to ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whether you're in the United States, the United Kingdom, Nigeria, the Philippines, Lebanon, or anywhere else, please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. We are a family scattered across the globe, and we need to remember to pray for one another. Because what I'm about to share with you is a reminder that evil is real, but so is the God who delivers us from it. I was 30 years old when I learned what true darkness looks like. Erbil is the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, an ancient city that's seen empires rise and fall for thousands of years. I grew up there in my father's auto repair shop, learning to fix cars before I could properly read. The smell of engine oil and welding metal was the smell of home. When my father died, he left me the shop, and I was proud to continue his work. I was a simple man with simple dreams. Fix cars, make enough money to live, maybe get married someday, have children who would carry on the family business. I wasn't particularly religious, though I went to the mosque on Fridays to keep up appearances. I was just trying to live my life in peace. Then ISIS came. In 2014, everything changed. The black flags appeared. The brutality began. Christians, Yazidis, Shia Muslims, anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of proper faith, were being slaughtered or driven from their homes. The stories coming from Mosul and other captured cities were horrifying. Beheadings, crucifixions, slavery, mass graves. Erbil was relatively safe because of the Kurdish forces protecting it, but thousands of refugees were flooding into the city, fleeing the terror. Many of them were Christians from the Nineveh Plains, Assyrians whose families had lived in Iraq since the time of Christ. My shop was on the edge of the city, near one of the routes refugees used. I started seeing families passing by, exhausted, terrified, carrying whatever they could grab before fleeing. Old people, children, pregnant women. They'd been walking for days in the heat, and ISIS was hunting them. I couldn't just watch. I started offering water to people who passed by. Then I started letting families rest in my shop overnight, hidden from the main road. Then I began using vehicles I was repairing to transport people further into safety, loading them into vans and trucks and driving them to the camps or to Christian villages in the mountains where they'd be protected. It was dangerous. If ISIS sympathizers found out what I was doing, they'd kill me. But I couldn't stop. These were human beings. They were terrified. They needed help. One night, I was hiding a group of 7 people in my shop, an elderly Assyrian couple, their daughter, her husband, and their 3 children. They'd been walking for 5 days. The youngest child was sick with fever. The grandfather had collapsed from exhaustion. I gave them food and water. I let them sleep on the floor of my shop. The next morning, I would drive them to a Christian village about 2 hours away. Before they left, the old man, his name was Yonan, took my hand. His eyes were full of tears. He told me that God would bless me for what I'd done, that I'd saved his family's lives. He reached into his bag and pulled out a book. It was a Bible, worn and old, with pages yellowed from years of reading. He told me he wanted me to have it, that it was precious to him, but that I deserved something precious in return for the precious lives I'd saved. I tried to refuse. I told him to keep it, that it was his, but he insisted. He said that maybe God had put me in their path not just to save them, but so they could give me something as well. I took the Bible not because I wanted to read it, but because refusing would have hurt this kind old man who'd lost everything. I kept it in my shop. For weeks, I didn't open it. I was too busy. More refugees kept coming, and I kept helping them escape. The situation was getting worse. ISIS was advancing closer. The fear was suffocating. Then came a night when I couldn't sleep. The sounds of distant artillery kept me awake. I was alone in my shop, wondering if ISIS would eventually reach Erbil, wondering what would happen to me if they did. Out of boredom and restlessness, I opened the Bible. I started reading the Gospel of Matthew. I'd heard stories about Jesus before. In Islam, we're taught he was a prophet, but I'd never read the actual accounts of his life. As I read through the night, I was struck by something I hadn't expected. This Jesus was nothing like what I'd been told. He wasn't just a prophet delivering messages. He was claiming to be God himself. He was performing miracles. He was teaching about love and forgiveness in ways that felt revolutionary. He was touching lepers and eating with sinners and elevating women and children. And then he was willingly going to his death, not in battle, not accidentally, but as a deliberate sacrifice. He was letting himself be tortured and killed to pay for the sins of humanity. All around me was violence. ISIS violence, war violence, religious violence justified by claims of serving God. But here in these pages was a completely different picture. A God who chose to suffer rather than inflict suffering. A God who died for his enemies instead of killing them. Night after night, while the war raged around Erbil, I read that Bible. I read all 4 Gospels. I read Paul's letters. I read about grace, unearned, undeserved favor from God. About salvation that couldn't be earned through good works but was a free gift. About a God who loved the world so much he gave his only Son. Something was shifting inside me. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over the mountains. I was still helping refugees escape. But now I was also praying, awkwardly, uncertainly, to Jesus. Asking him if he was real. Asking him to help me understand. Asking him to protect the people I was trying to save. The war eventually stabilized. ISIS was pushed back. Erbil remained secure. The flood of refugees slowed to a trickle. Life began returning to something like normal, though nothing would ever truly be normal again after what we'd witnessed. By that time, I'd made my decision. I believed Jesus was who he claimed to be. I believed he had died for my sins and risen from the dead. I wanted to follow him. But I knew this was dangerous. Iraq wasn't like Western countries where you could change your religion freely. For a Muslim to become a Christian, that was apostasy. That was a death sentence in the eyes of many. I started attending a small church in Erbil secretly. I would park my car several blocks away and walk the rest of the distance, making sure no one I knew saw me. The church was mostly Assyrian Christians, but they welcomed me with open arms. They baptized me in a private ceremony with only a few people present. For 6 months, I managed to keep my conversion hidden. I continued going to the mosque occasionally to avoid suspicion. I continued running my shop. I continued living a double life. Then I made a mistake. I'd become comfortable, careless. One Sunday, I left the church through the front entrance instead of the back exit I usually used. I was talking with one of the church members, distracted, not paying attention. Across the street, watching, was a man I recognized. His name was Kareem, and we'd been friends growing up. But during the ISIS occupation, Kareem had disappeared. There were rumors he'd joined them. After ISIS was defeated, he'd returned to Erbil, claiming he'd been forced to work for them, that he'd had no choice. Our eyes met. I saw recognition flash across his face. Then disgust. I knew immediately I was in trouble. 3 days later, I was closing my shop for the evening when a van pulled up. 4 men got out. They moved quickly, efficiently. Before I could react, they'd grabbed me, thrown a hood over my head, and shoved me into the van. I tried to fight. I tried to scream. Someone hit me hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. Someone else pressed something against my head, a gun, I thought, and told me to be quiet or die right there. They drove for what felt like hours. I couldn't see anything through the hood. I couldn't tell where we were going. I prayed desperately, silently, begging God to save me, begging him not to let me die like this. When they finally stopped and pulled me out of the van, they dragged me into a building. They threw me into a room and locked the door. When they finally pulled off the hood, I was in a small concrete cell with no windows. Just a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived in hell. They came for me multiple times each day. They would drag me to another room and beat me. They used fists, feet, sticks, electrical cables. They wanted me to renounce my faith publicly, to make a video confessing I'd been deceived and was returning to Islam. I refused. So they increased the torture. They hung me from my wrists for hours until I thought my shoulders would dislocate. They beat the soles of my feet until I couldn't walk. They burned me with cigarettes. They held my head underwater until I thought I would drown, then pulled me up gasping and did it again. But the worst The absolute worst was the psychological torture. They showed me videos. Videos of other apostates, people who'd left Islam, being executed. Some were beheaded. Some were shot. Some were burned alive. They would play these videos on a laptop and make me watch, telling me this was what happened to traitors like me. Telling me this was what they would do to me if I didn't recant. One video showed a young man about my age being beheaded. They played it over and over. They told me that would be me. That they'd film it and send it to my family. That everyone would see what happens to people who abandon their faith. I cannot describe the terror of those moments. The absolute certainty that you're about to die, that you've seen exactly how it will happen, that there's no escape. My mind started breaking under the weight of it. I would hallucinate. I would lose track of time. I would forget where I was. They brought in a man who claimed to be a religious scholar. He told me I'd been led astray by Western propaganda, that Christianity was a corrupted religion, that Jesus never claimed to be God. He had arguments ready for every objection, every question. He was intelligent, persuasive. But every time he spoke, I remembered what I'd read in the Bible. I remembered Jesus saying, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." I remembered him forgiving his executioners from the cross. I remembered the love that poured through those pages. I told the scholar I couldn't deny what I knew to be true. He left, and the beatings intensified. By the third week, I was barely conscious most of the time. My body was covered in bruises and burns and cuts. I'd lost so much weight I could count every rib. I was having trouble breathing because of the damage to my ribs. I was fading. One night, or maybe it was day, I couldn't tell anymore, I heard sounds outside my cell. Shouting. Gunfire. Explosions. The door burst open. Men with guns rushed in, but they weren't my captors. They were speaking Aramaic, the language of the Assyrian Christians. They were Christian militiamen who'd been tipped off about my location. They grabbed me and carried me out. I was too weak to walk. Outside, there was chaos, gunfire, people running, vehicles pulling up. They threw me in the back of a truck and drove away at high speed. I learned later that the church I'd been attending had been trying to find me since I disappeared. They'd contacted Christian militia groups who still operated in the area. Someone had provided intelligence about where I was being held. They'd mounted a rescue operation. I'd been saved. Literally pulled from the jaws of death. But I wasn't okay. They took me to a hospital in a Christian village in the mountains. My physical wounds healed over the following weeks. The cuts, the burns, the broken bones. But the wounds inside didn't heal. I couldn't sleep. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the execution videos, of drowning, of the concrete cell. I would wake up screaming. I was terrified constantly. Every sound made me jump. Every stranger's face looked like my captors. I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't relax. My mind was trapped in that cell even though my body was free. The church arranged for me to relocate permanently to the Christian village. It wasn't safe for me to return to Erbil. They helped me set up a small workshop where I could continue working on cars. But I wasn't the same person who'd run that shop in Erbil. That Omar was gone, left behind in that concrete cell. I isolated myself. I barely spoke to anyone. I went through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. A part of me had died in that cell, and I didn't know how to get it back. A priest in the village, Father Daniel, kept checking on me. He was patient. He didn't push. He just showed up, sat with me, let me be silent. Eventually, I started talking. I told him about the torture, about the videos, about the certainty I was going to die, about the guilt I felt for surviving when so many others hadn't. He told me about other survivors in the village, people who'd been tortured by ISIS, people who'd watched their families killed, people who carried trauma like I did. He asked if I'd be willing to meet with them. I didn't want to. I wanted to be alone with my pain. But Father Daniel was persistent. I started attending a support group for trauma survivors. There were 10 of us, different ages, different backgrounds, but all carrying wounds that wouldn't heal. We sat in a circle once a week and shared our stories. Some people cried. Some people sat in silence. Some people raged. I realized I wasn't alone. That others understood the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the feeling that you'd never be safe again. Slowly, so slowly, I began to heal. Not completely. The trauma was still there. The memories were still there. But I was learning to live alongside them rather than being consumed by them. A man in the group named Sammy told me about a project he was working on. He'd been a soldier who lost both legs in the war. He was trying to help other disabled veterans by modifying vehicles so they could drive again, hand controls, wheelchair lifts, custom adaptations. He needed someone with mechanical skills to help. I agreed to help him. At first, it was just something to occupy my time. But as I worked with these veterans, men and women who'd lost limbs, who'd lost mobility, who'd lost so much, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: purpose. I was using the skills my father had taught me to give people back their independence. To help them drive again, to help them work again, to help them participate in life again. One day, a veteran I'd helped modify a van for came back to thank me. He told me that being able to drive again had changed his life, that he'd felt like a burden on his family, but now he could contribute again. As he drove away in his modified van, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my kidnapping: joy. I'm 32 now. I live in that Christian village in the mountains. I still have nightmares. I still struggle with anxiety and hypervigilance. I still have days when the weight of what happened crushes me. I probably always will. But I'm alive. And I'm using my life to help others who've been broken by war and violence. I think about Yonan sometimes, the old man who gave me the Bible that started all of this. I wonder if he made it, if his family is safe. I wonder if he had any idea that the book he gave me would change my entire life, would lead to both my conversion and my near-death. I don't regret reading that Bible. I don't regret following Jesus, even though it cost me almost everything: my shop, my home city, my peace of mind, 3 weeks of torture that will haunt me forever. Because here's what I know: Jesus was with me in that cell. He was with me when they showed me those videos. He was with me when I thought I was going to die. He sustained me. He gave me strength to refuse to deny him. And he orchestrated my rescue when there was no human way I should have survived. Following Jesus doesn't mean you won't suffer. It doesn't mean you'll be protected from evil. But it means you'll never face evil alone. It means your suffering isn't meaningless. It means that even in the darkest cell, even in the most terrifying moment, God is present. And that makes all the difference.